Welcome to Some Things Considered, the podcast where we are obsessed with story. We celebrate creativity and we talk to cool people to find out what makes them tick. I'm your host, Sean Murphy. I'm an author. I direct the Center for Story at Shenandoah University, and I run the nonprofit 1455 Lit Arts. For more about me and what I do, check out seanmurphy.net. Hey, everybody, welcome back to Some Things Considered. This is the podcast where we are obsessed with creativity and storytelling. And my only goal is to find really interesting people to talk to them, see how they use narrative and storytelling in their work, and get a little bit behind the scenes and see what makes them tick. I'm Sean Murphy, your host. I'm a writer. I direct the Center for Story at Shenandoah University, and I run the nonprofit 1455 Lit Arts. You can find out more about that at seanmurphy.net. But like I said, the primary goal, both of this podcast and really my day in and day out, is this type of work affords one the chance to hang out with people much cooler and smarter. Today, not only is no exception, it's a great pleasure, as always, to share space with my dear friend, Gregg Wilhelm. Let me introduce him and thank him for being here. This is the condensed version, which I always do. You will want to go explore this dude and figure out all that you've been missing. But Gregg became the director of George Mason's creative writing program in the spring of 2018. And his expertise, modestly described here, but his expertise does cover book publishing, arts administration, and higher ed, among many other things. He started his career at Johns Hopkins Press, shout out to Baltimore, of course, launched three imprints, founded a nonprofit literary arts organization, CityLit Project, and launched its CityLit Press imprint. He sat on grant review panels for a variety of organizations, and in the fall of 2020, he co-founded Watershed Lit, the Center for Literary Engagement and Publishing Practice, a center chartered by the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at my alma mater, George Mason University. As you can hear and see, Gregg is both a busy, productive, and super cool dude. Gregg, here we are again. It's always great to chop it up with you, but thanks for being here, man.
Thanks for inviting me, Sean. That introduction was way too generous. And I think we both will agree. We'll wait for that third person, that third cool person to show up.
Right. Fake it till you make it, brother.
Thanks for having me.
So listen, I mean, anyone that knows us, I hope there's a few of you out there. This is not our first rodeo. We've appeared in public. Obviously, you and I chat all the time about these matters. This is just such a great opportunity for people that do know you or me to get caught up on some of these matters. But for folks that are like hearing a lot about education, the state of, the state of art, the state of the literary industry, what's going on with students, how is AI impacting everything? You are such a relevant and timely voice on these. I promise not to just throw the whole thing at you, but I will say I'm both giddy and a little overwhelmed because there's so many things I want you to weigh in on. But I would kick it off by saying, although again, this is not our first rodeo, we had a really great talk that I felt wonderful about in 2019, which pre-COVID, it seems like a century ago, but we, with some other folks, talked about the state of the literary industry. And I mean, I think we really, between the people that were talking, we were like, we feel pretty good. Like we're covering what's going on now. And I'll confess, it seems like ancient history. So maybe my opening salvo to you would be from any number of purviews, right? As a professor, as a writer, as an arts advocate, what are some things that have changed and maybe not changed since we talked in 2019 about just like what's going on with literature?
Wow. I mean, fortunately, a lot of great literature is still being made, right? And times of strife and challenge and oppression, regardless of what form that takes, are often the inspiration, the catalyst for making great art. Um, it's a weird time, right? It's a really strange time. Who would have, when we're sitting in that barn, I think it was a
Yeah.
barn in with some colleagues of ours in 2019, I was barely thinking about AI, although I guess we were still kind of reeling from the first time the current president had an administration. And we thought, you know, these are just, you know, these are days to get through, and here we are, experiencing it again. And I think the long the long tail of this story is going to be, regardless of what happens after the end of these 4 years, I think the ramifications are going to met out and be felt for perhaps generations to come. So our work on the ground, and the work of other artists and arts administrators, will we have a heavy lift. I mean, my goodness, think about what's happened with the NEA.
Yeah.
Think about what's happened with a friend of mine, the former Librarian of Congress at the Library of Congress, being so unceremoniously dismissed
Yeah.
the other month. The sort of ongoing assault on higher education, certainly the assault on diverse voices and immigrant stories, which are the bedrock of this country. It's just really a weird time, um, to be working in this environment, but also feeling like sometimes I'm not doing enough, or I'm not capable of doing enough to support the people who are on a daily basis being threatened and afraid, um, either from their day-to-day living, or just threatened or afraid to be who they are and to be the voices and make the art that's true and authentic to them.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that. I love all of that. That resonates. I think the other thing I'm putting, well, I'm not putting pressure on you because you are that guy, but like, I think I certainly talk to, teachers. I talk to arts advocates. I talk to artists. You are, a fairly rare bird in that you've got real skin in the game on a lot of those fronts. So I think the pressures that you're feeling are, as you just articulated, kind of on the macro and micro level, like the state of art funding, the state of a healthy kind of creative discourse, but then on a one-to-one basis, students are scared. Students are facing a very fraught future that we are not able to say, trust us, it's going to be okay. And I do think that's one definite thing I think is different. I know we're very similar age, graduated, early 90s, and, it wasn't the best time, but there was a sense amongst the elder states, women and men, it's going to be rough, it's going to be crazy, but it'll all work out. And I feel like as the captains passing the torch to the next generation, we don't have the ability to say, this is definitely a bump in the road, but things will work out. I don't think that means we're predicting catastrophe, but it just seems like it's a very tenuous time that nobody has a handle on. Like, what advice do we give students? What advice do we give writers? And you and I are both in a position where we can't afford to be aloof. We've got to deal on the individual level, which is starts local, but on a grander scale, it starts to get really discouraging.
I can't help to think about something you just alluded to, and I've caught myself saying it on more than one occasion lately, is that when you and I were coming of age, um, we were just kind of coming off of we were still in the Cold War, and there's still that sort of overhanging threat of nuclear annihilation. I did not ever do the test where in school you went under the desk and covered your head, but
Right.
we were just a few years away from that. And I was all up in arms about Ronald Reagan, and it's all over, and he's a fascist. And I was, coming of age in the punk rock
Yeah.
scene in Baltimore. And I literally have said several times, I thought that was intense and like, existential. And I can't imagine what young people growing, coming of age in this time, are going through. I mean, I have a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old,
Yeah.
and they're not quite in the angry stage there yet about
Yeah.
what's going on completely around them, but they're smart enough to know what's going on. And I can't imagine sort of the ethos that they're kind of growing up around,
Right.
let alone the undergrads and grads that I work with who are going into a really bizarre, probably the most bizarre economic and workforce
Yes.
um, environment ever. Um, I've been talking about this so much that my wife actually picked up a book all about punk rock and Reagan and coming of age in the late 70s and 80s. Um, and it's a great book by Kevin Matson, who actually grew up in the DC punk scene and went on to be, maybe he should be the third cool person we ask to
Yeah, right.
join us. But yeah, it's you can't even compare it to coming of age when we did. It seems quaint almost.
Well, it does. You know what you just made me think of, Greg. We probably could each riff on, myriad examples, but very crudely put, there was a sense coming out of punk rock and being, young writers, there was always the option to sell out and get a job. So there was that grounding of like, well, yeah, if you want to completely, give in to the man, you can go get a desk job. I think what we're facing now, right, are very bright, gifted, sensitive, awesome students that are graduating. It's like, some people probably would be fair to ask, like, can I sell out, please? Like, that's not even an option, like, just to have a steady job and start a family. So that's when I think of the tectonic shift of
Yeah.
to be an artist right now or an artist starting out, there's always all kinds of possibilities and you can create the world you want to live in. But yeah, I mean, it's tough to find ways to, be genuinely useful or encouraging. But that being said, that's what you are in the business of doing.
Yeah, there was always a dichotomy when we were growing up about being an artist or being a capitalist or whatever, or joining the man or selling out. And I think students today um, want and expect, well, not both, because they're still, I think, left-leaning and
Yeah,
free thinking
yeah,
and empathetic and concerned about the world, its people, and its environment. But they want to come out of a degree program with some skills that they can put on their resume and leverage for getting a job.
yeah,
And we do that at Mason, but we can't control the economy or the job market
right.
or the impact of what one tweet by one administrator says one night versus what said the next day,
Yeah,
and how that wildly can impact everything from the marketplace to the employment picture. Um, I think, yeah, I keep going back to my experience with like design thinking, which is very natural. Design thinking as a leadership and a management skill,
yeah,
which is very natural to me as an artist, who's not afraid of and very used to rejection and development and failing and evaluating and reiterating.
yeah,
And I think that's one of the strongest things that we deliver to our students is um, the capacity to be nimble and creative and adaptive.
yeah,
Because I think those are the kinds of skill sets that are really going to um, emerge as successful traits and not, you know, you might remember when we were going to college was the big transition from really the sort of post-World War to um, emphasis on the humanities and the liberal arts to like, oh, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to take accounting classes, and then go to be an accountant somewhere, or I'm going to,
right.
it became a vocational training. And I think I think it's being proven that being nimble and creative and design thinking is a lot more valuable, not only today, but in all cases.
Again, beautifully put. Here, here. I think perhaps another way of putting that is for those of our ilk that were trying to kind of eke out some type of path. I won't even say career, a path of creativity. It was a nice to have to be nimble and maybe be able to wear a bunch of hats. Now it's a need to have, and that leads me to both a question and I want to kind of like full stop moment of silence. Like, I've acknowledged it before, but since we have this opportunity, I'm happy to do it again. I really, as always, want to celebrate you and what you and your team have created. I'm a huge fan of Watershed, the entity, but the whole idea behind it. You were way ahead of the curve in terms of how programs are starting to finally, in my opinion, evolve and adapt to a 21st century reality. Yeah, I have to do that, but 21st century reality. So thank goodness there's a program like Mason's that is already knee deep, at least, in this notion of, look, it's we all want every artist to make a living. The reality is not all of us are. So go all in, drive a cab, wait tables, but if you want to have a sense of it's not all or nothing, these programs are meant to give you some skills where you might be able to do something that you really enjoy and can produce creative work and of course follow your dreams. So maybe talk a little bit about the origins and how, in my opinion, I don't want to speak for you, but just from what I've seen, you were the perfect person to shepherd that because you did have the outside academia background of understanding publishing, understanding how budgets are passed and how budgets are created. So you had a kind of a practical sensibility that really helped inform the type of program that had the luxury of being an artistic haven for a lot of schools. And if there are still schools that can do that, more power to them. But I dig what Mason is doing because I think it's what students need right now.
Well, a lot to unpack there. Thank you very much. And it's as if you were in the room 7 years ago in 2018 when I was pitching my idea to the hiring committee of what the program could be, and it was sort of based on the question of how can we make an MFA and a BFA in creative writing program relevant in the 21st century. Now, the art form and the creating of the art and the learning of the art and the mentorship of our faculty is in and of itself more than enough to make an arts program legitimate, right? And make it necessary. I totally believe that. But I was also looking bigger picture in the sense of the skill sets and the professional development that we could deliver, which I don't think we were delivering as well as we could, and other programs at the time um, tended not to deliver at all. So props, first of all, to my predecessors, people like Bill Miller, who was the longtime MFA and creative writing director at George Mason, um, and people before him. There was a constellation of literary art activity that was going on outside of the classroom at Mason before I arrived. Things like Fall for the Book, a phenomenal uh, annual literary festival that is developed into a year-round celebration of the literary arts and books and writers.
Yeah.
Stillhouse Press, which is a teaching press run by students who have published award-winning books. The Shoe Center for International Writers, who brings writers from around the world to our campus and helps support the research of our students if their thesis research sends them abroad. Um, Poetry Daily came aboard in 2019. It's an online daily poetry anthology, delivering some of the best in contemporary poetry in English. So my bright idea was simply to sort of figure out a way to bring these constellations that have been orbiting these planets that have been orbiting the program since the 1970s and 1980s and then into the 1990s, how to sort of bring them together so they talk to one another more strategically. They would leverage their capacity for fundraising, marketing. We have a lot of public-facing programs, so it was not only an internal Mason sort of messaging, but sort of how do we develop audiences in the city of Fairfax and beyond. Certainly, COVID and the downtime was unexpected, and each of those entities did a great job pivoting to online programming, some of which still exists today to sustain audiences they developed during 2020 and 2021. Um, yeah, so it was Deb Schutica, a previous chair of the English department at Mason, and I sort of just brainstormed ways to make better use of these valuable assets that we already had in the program. And that's sort of
Yeah.
the origin of the center itself. And so
Yeah.
those five entities make up the sort of leadership team of the center. Then I found new ways of funding graduate students. We developed graduate professional assistantships. So we attract students to the program and fund them just like we do graduate teaching assistants, but they work for the Watershed Lit. Meanwhile, we've done all kinds of changes and development with the composition team, our colleagues on the other side of the Department of English. And I think we graduate some of the most pedagogically sound and in classroom experienced young uh, graduates who want to go on to teaching careers in secondary or higher ed. And I think we graduate some of the best professionals looking for careers in all kinds of communications, arts, and literary arts sectors, where, again, like you said, where we do stuff day in and day out that we like to do, and we work really hard, and we figure out how do people negotiate with board members, and we figure out how to crunch numbers, and we actually come to a point where we enjoy fundraising because we know how it's important to make possible what we do, um, and communications and social media and all those things that are part and parcel of developing your own literary citizenship, but also developing literary communities and, delivering those kinds of public facing programs in a time that needs it more than maybe ever in the time that we've been working.
Yeah, I mean, Greg, I think if we had had this, well, we have had this over beers and Irish food, but like if we had this conversation even 3 years ago, I think I would have been saying this is a model for MFAs to follow, to make their programs more practical, more logistically sound, not to mention more morally sound. But what's interesting to me is on the other end, even the people, and I have to do this, but even the people that have made it, whether it ranges from just being published to being well published, everything I read and everyone I talk to, almost without exception, the hustle is now the de facto, that is the default setting. There are very few, if any, writers, especially lit fiction or poetry, for heaven's sake, that can afford the 20th century paradigm of like, I get the work done and I put it in the world and it follows. Like, if
Right.
you've already got a brand, that might actually not work anymore, but that could work. But in the 21st century, I'm everything I read is about the onus is increasingly on the creative across industries to understand marketing, understand PR, understand brand, understand technology, et cetera, et cetera. This is not a revelation, anyone that follows these things, but what I'm at pains to point out is there where this overlaps is Mason was both ahead of the curve, but in a funny way, even writers that are established could probably come back and get an MFA at Mason because they need those skills. So this is like a vital kind of cultural necessity. It's no longer a nice to have.
Well, let me emphasize that I wouldn't be able to have done what we did at Mason as quickly and as solidly if it weren't for the fantastic faculty we already had taking care of the students in the art and the craft and the work. That was solid. I could depend on them. We have now 9 fantastic faculty members in fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. And I relied on them and I trusted them to be delivering the quality instruction and mentorship in the classroom, which is the heart and soul of an MFA program and an MFA community. So then I was able to focus on some of these other things, like starting helping Watershed Lit get launched and developing the graduate professional assistantships and whatnot. To a point now that we are a very unique program. You will not find, we might not be the right program for a young emerging writer, but we are very unique, I think, across the board when compared to other programs. We got 150 applications this year. We admitted a record 45 students. Of those 45 students, and I think that speaks a lot to the quality of writing.
Yeah,
It also is a cultural touchstone because applications to grad school tends to increase in times of stress, and certainly,
sure.
unfortunately, in our area, in the Northern Virginia and the DC area, a lot of people have unfortunately lost their jobs, and that's so unfortunate. And some of those people have looked for other avenues for their energy and creativity. So that may um, uh, uh, account for some of the spike in the applications that we have. But we admitted 45, 20 students have enrolled, no, 25 students enrolled, and 20, we were able to fund fully 20 students. That means free tuition, a stipend for their graduate assistantship. So so we're really strong.
Yeah.
In a time when unfortunately other MFA programs aren't, certainly at West Virginia. Oh, I was thinking earlier when you said about I was thinking a lot about this week at the University of Virginia and doing the right thing. You just used the word moral
Yeah.
not too long ago, and I'm still trying to digest the news from Charlottesville in the last week when James Ryan was essentially ousted from his position as president of the University of Virginia. He was hired away from Harvard, I don't know how many years ago, um, because of the great work he did with diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah.
And the man hasn't changed. His leadership skills and priorities haven't changed. And sort of the world
Right.
kind of changed around him. And lo and behold, here we are. He's being forced out for the same sorts of, more or less, same sorts of priorities. So, what does that mean for an MFA program? Diversity and inclusion and empathy has always been a large part of my work, from since the start of CityLit in 2004. Um, but in 2018 and 2019, we started reading books like, Felicia Rose Chavez's Anti-Racist Classroom, Craft in the Real World. So we really been thinking about David Murray's Stranger's Journey, race, identity, and narrative craft and writing. So we've been reading these texts,
Yeah.
not strategically or programmatically, but we've all been reading texts like these to sort of really think individually, but then coming together as a community to think about how we conduct workshop, um, the role of diversity and different perspectives. I'm trying to get through a book this summer all about fiction from a Chinese perspective, from an Eastern Chinese fiction perspective, and it's just absolutely shedding so much light on what I thought was sort of scripture when it comes to like thinking about fiction and thinking about writing and thinking about perspectives. So we're trying to bring a lot of that kind of different perspectives into our work in the community at Mason because I think it's a moral obligation and it's work that I've always believed in, and I'm not going to change that now because of
Yeah.
shifting political sands or the dynamics of the funding marketplace, which is also shifting, right?
Yeah.
Um, I know, fall for the book included, we were expecting some support from the NEA. That's not going to happen now. So how do you go forward and move forward, and what resources do you turn
Yeah.
um, to make ends meet so you continue to do the good work that it's obviously wanted by the public or people when it comes to our programming. So
Yeah, I mean, where I find sparks of both encouragement and inspiration, um, is thinking none of these battles are especially new and certainly not unique to America. In fact, America, thinking of McCarthyism, for instance, but
right.
we've largely, walked the walk as it relates to the First Amendment and the notion of, I think because the stakes were so small the artists didn't matter, the artists were like, oh, that's cute, we're gonna divvy up the pie, on Wall Street, and you guys write your poetry. In a weird way, I think the most validating case for the humanities is connecting the dots and saying this has been a decades long propaganda attack to delegitimize the whole notion of the humanities. That's not because it's not threatening, it's because there's thinking and the ability to multitask and be entrepreneurial in ways that don't conform to, say, a Wall Street ethos. Um, the humanities globally and historically have always been under assault. So when I seek inspiration, rather than it's easy to start wallowing, in how tough times are, and they are. But this is nothing that other cultures haven't faced before, and this is when it's time, in my opinion, for storytellers and creators to dig in and say, how do we tell different and better stories? So if we've got to change a few words around to outsmart the nitwits who are going to lose interest in some of this stuff in a couple of years anyway, we can work around this. These are not, I don't think, fundamental shifts to how art gets made. But in the meantime, we have to be nimble and we have to be clever and creative. So I do find, however naive, avenues of opportunity and inspiration, even in the darkest times.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I'm currently reading and I've read it and I'm rereading it and trying to digest a an article in the New Yorker from late April by Graham Burnett, who's a historian of science at Princeton, and the title of the article is "Will the Humanities Survive Artificial Intelligence?" And it's been weird because I really took a deep dive into AI and in particular how AI is impacting creative writing and book publishing
Yeah.
um, like last fall. And then after January 20th, everything kind of like it became kind of quaint to be thinking about AI when it felt like there are more existential battles to be waged and to fight.
Right.
And this article is actually taking the opposite stance insofar as saying, yeah, you might be worrying about the administration's war on higher ed right now, but don't forget that the real big watershed, pardon the pun, moment is still going to be AI. And there's all kinds of interesting new reports about, AI and the impact on the brain and creativity and whether student writing is dead, both from a composition, literary analysis perspective and also from a creative writing, creative production perspective. I tend to be someone, I'm a little bit of a closet tech geek. And if it weren't for technology and the kinds of technology that I've embraced, I wouldn't have been in book publishing as long as I have been,
Yeah.
because the sort of old way of making books with large printing presses and ink and large print runs to make a unit price manageable.
Yeah.
No, I couldn't do that.
Yep.
And so not only did I embrace technology that was more affordable and more nimble, yet still made a nice product, a nice feeling in your hand, a nice book. Um, it actually freed me up to take editorial risks, and I was publishing poetry and fiction that I may not have touched with the proverbial 10-foot pole,
Yeah.
15, 20 years ago because of those considerations, those economic considerations.
Yeah.
So um, I am not I'm not preaching doomsday insofar as
Yeah.
AI goes, but I'm being cautiously optimistic. But I'm trying to sort of think about AI and how I use it and how what its role in the classroom and ultimately its role in the creating of art or of
Right.
fiction. I'm trying to think about it in the continuum of the technology that I've thought about a lot,
Yeah.
starting with the revolutionary press that Gutenberg made, all the way through offset printing to digital printing. And the way we do printing and marketing and distribution today is totally radically different in the short time that I've been in this business.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm trying to take a cautious but kind of optimistic approach to what AI could do. And at the end of the day, and I think this is what this article is suggesting, is that students are using it.
Yeah.
It's here.
Yeah.
They're afraid to admit they're using it because they've been trained to equate it with cheating.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it can be a tool, just like the keyboard is a tool that I've used when I stopped using manual typewriters, just the way the internet is a tool when I still go to libraries. I go to libraries frequently, but I don't
Right.
go to do research much really anymore.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, and this is just my experience is that AI has not crept into my creative writing classroom insofar as the output,
Yeah.
uh, the poetry, the short stories, the essays are still um, being generated by deeply deeply thinking students, deeply caring students who are in my classroom for a reason. And the AI slide deck that I've made, that's the whole point, is that you can use AI for research and maybe running some ideas through
Yeah.
some large language machines. Um, but we never know how our art's going to be received, how it's going to be read, looked, or listened to. We don't know if we're ever going to be acknowledged or let alone compensated for that work. So you need to enjoy the process. And it's through the process that the art is made, and figuring yourself out
Yeah.
is done in grappling with the issues that are important to you through the process. So why would you turn to AI to mimic that process,
Yeah.
to replace that process? It's the very kernel of what being an artist is all about. So it really hasn't, I have not seen it
Yeah.
in my creative classroom.
That's a extended mic drop moment. So first of all, well said, brother. Uh, I'll be both brief and blunt. First of all, AI in the creative writing classroom is the most physician heal thyself moment. If any student is even tempted to use AI to write a short story, you're not a writer. Full stop. Next topic. Anyone that's using AI in the classroom, if you're getting one over on the professor in whatever the course is, you're wasting your parents' money and you're probably not equipping yourself to eventually be able to function in society. So the only people that are cheating right now are hurting themselves, and we need smarter voices with a bigger platform putting that pressure back on parents so it doesn't just land in teachers' laps like AI is ruining everything. Fix it.
Right.
How about we emphasize the point of being here is to learn? And what I've told teachers in my modest and humble capacity is this might oblige you to get outside of your own comfort zone and measure performance a different way. It might make your job. What I've heard from so many teachers, and I've got nothing but empathy, sincerely, nothing but empathy for any teacher right now, under any circumstance. But with AI, everyone's talking about how their job's gotten twice as hard. And I kind of want to flip the script and in a very non-cavalier way say, maybe your job could be twice as easy. Let them give presentations. Like there are ways around, like they're just going to cheat on the paper. Then don't assign a paper. Like there are ways that we can live with this. And as you just articulated, there are ways it can augment the learning experience where it need not be an all or nothing scenario. Like you're using AI, you're cheating, or you're not using AI and we're going to sign a pact that we're going to use, pencil and paper. There are ways around this, but as it relates to art, I'm surprisingly unconflicted because what I already said, but then I would say to any writer, if you're truly concerned that AI is going to compete with anything you're writing, you've got much bigger problems than AI. If there's an audience out there that's like, your
Absolutely.
book of poetry or this AI produced thing, the problem lies with you and you're not writing a good enough piece of work that it can stand out above something that was clearly generated by a device.
Absolutely. Now, that's not to say that I'm not concerned about copyright infringement, and I'm also concerned about large language models that are siphoning the hard work of creatives and other scientists and researchers to feed their models and which is the basis of generating the AI and the chat GPT. I think yeah, there's some hard thinking and hard work to be done there still.
Yeah.
And it's going to evolve. The kinds of things that we're dealing with today um, won't be the same sort of AI generated issues that we're going to be talking about tomorrow.
Right.
Um, so, so I think it's beholden on, and there was cheating before AI. There was cheating, you know.
Right.
I was sitting here before we got on this call,
Yeah.
and I struggled with math. I really struggled with math, and I went to a math heavy high school, and I would make handwritten notes on 8.5 by 11 paper And where I worked in the afternoon at an engineering firm, they had a fancy Xerox machine. And I shrunk that thing down to 50%. And then I took that 50%, shrunk it down to 50%, and then folded that up and stuck it in my shoe. Now, because of that, I can't tell you shit about thermodynamics. But I think the point is students, there are students who are going to use AI to cheat, just like there are students who are going to like cut and paste from Wikipedia.
Yep.
Um, and but they're also so it's a question of how are students using the tool
Yep.
to augment their learning process. It doesn't mean they're not still thinking deeply.
Yep.
It might be that they're thinking a little differently, and that's okay. That's their jam, and it's up to us to adapt to that. Now, I'm not speaking to my colleagues on the composition side of the room in the English department. That might be
Right.
slightly different,
Yep.
or not. But it is a little easy in my world because of what I just said earlier about,
Yep.
we make art because we're angry or we're sad or we're happy or we're trying to figure something out about why stuff happens in this human life of ours or in the world.
Right.
Um, and that process of figuring out is through the process of creation. So you don't want to rob yourself of that experience by just
Yeah.
generating some AI poems just to fulfill my syllabus requirement.
Indeed. I would say that this is also, both of us are old enough to have seen kind of the trend lines. To a certain extent, these are some cultural, chickens coming home to roost, like the systemic attack on humanities, these ubiquitous devices that have clearly impacted attention spans, the way we receive content. Um, I know enough Gen Z kids that even if given the opportunity, don't want to watch a movie on a big screen, which is one of my personal like life joys, don't want to. And if you tried to force them, they'd get uncomfortable. They would rather watch it rather than, swim against those tides. I recognize like these are generational shifts, but I say it to take the onus off of teachers in general, but writing teachers in particular. Like the lack of reading, the lack of interest in reading, who reads books anymore. Like there are a lot of bigger issues here that I think we can use as a learning or teaching moment to reclaim the humanities, or at least underscore in very tangible ways, this is what we're blathering about when we talk about art mattering, and what does authenticity mean, and what does enjoying the process. I read a really, I think it was brilliant, but I think it's already being overused. I can't think of a better example of someone basically saying with AI, it's like going to the gym, but having a machine do the workout for you. It's like, yeah, if that works for you, where you say, I was there, I clicked the button, it's like, but who is that benefiting on any level? You're not getting the benefits. You didn't do it, but the people that do work out or do write or read, that's the whole it's the process of engaging that makes it worthwhile. If you're not doing it, again, maybe you're cheating and getting over on someone, but you're only cheating yourself. I know that that might sound a little holier than thou, but it's like anything we do in life has to be organic and authentic, or else we're not going to derive any joy from it.
Yeah, I mean, it does worry me that I read a report not too long ago that I think high school students are coming out of high school without ever being assigned like a full novel to read.
Yep.
And I see it with my own kids. As much as I love them, their attention spans are different than mine was at their age. But I was also desperate to get my parents to buy the Atari Pong thing where you just had the boop 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 boop
Right.
boop, and I would look at that, and so I get it.
Yeah.
I think the device you just showed us is a little bit more nefarious than the tech that we had at when we were their age.
Yeah.
Um, but I think ultimately it becomes a question of, not having an opportunity to, sit with yourself. And I think being alone, there's been a lot of talk and writing about loneliness since COVID. and that's one thing. Quite a different thing is being alone and being comfortable in silence and being, comfortable being with yourself or being comfortable with the sensory experiences of reading a book, which are very different than a video game and very different from watching a movie, whether it's in a theater or in your palm. Um, and I've been noticing, like with my children, they talk a lot. They make a lot of noise. They don't say a lot. But the fact, and I think I've been thinking about, I think it's a well, it's the end of the school year and they're sort of decompressing and unwinding.
Right.
But
Right.
I think a lot of it is, just, boy, I remember just going for long, quiet walks or reading books or, you know, doing the kinds of things that silence wasn't the goal, but silence was often part of the environment that you were in. Um, I do have one daughter. Well, I don't want to separate my kids, but they do like puzzles. So it's really, I always get really excited when I see them quietly, working out a puzzle.
Yeah.
And the other daughter likes crosswords, or we do Wordle together. So it's, you know, um, but the fact that a lot students aren't graduating high school without
Yeah.
having an opportunity to read even a contemporary novel. They don't have to be, forced to read Ulysses or Moby Dick, which are novels that I only recently kind of got excited about again and finally read Moby Dick from not in one sitting, but from cover to cover a couple of summers ago. And I continually, I tackle Ulysses in chunks. I probably still haven't read the whole thing if you put all my sessions together. But
Yeah.
you know, uh, keeping kids excited about writing, the way we would write to, or rather, the way we read to our kids, and the way the kids would write stories out of whole
Yeah.
cloth without being prompted, those experiences melt away for some unknown reason. Maybe it's school
Mhm.
times, maybe it's being busy. Yeah, I think we're in a very special sector of the arts, in the creative writing world that you and I live in.
Yeah, and I think what that makes me think of is as it relates to technology, right? The times are a changing. I think, and I love your the notion of silence. I think it's safe to say for all of us, adults more so maybe. Well, not more so, but adults too. We're busy. It's not with these devices and social media like you can access content all the time and it never stops. So to create, white space and silence, not just for creativity, but for the ability to think clearly, seems paramount.
I was just thinking about white space, absolutely, and we think
Yeah.
about the pause in music, right, or the white space in a painting, or the breath in a poem,
Yeah.
which that's where often a lot of the mystery and the magic happens. Yeah, and I think there's a lack of appreciation for silence and white space in life. I don't meditate anymore, but sort of the same sort of
Yeah.
idea. Being
Yeah.
thoughtful, being mindful. It's hard to do in times like this.
Yeah, and what you were just saying also made me think of I was at a conference this spring and it felt like a real cliche moment because someone, and it was right out of central casting, but it was a teacher who, suffice it to say, was closer to the end of her career than the beginning. So I won't say she was older, but an experienced teacher, and basically used her opportunity to pipe into the conversation to say, it's hopeless. The kids don't read, they won't read, good luck trying to get them to read poetry. And it was all I could do to not be that guy. And rather than join the easy chorus of like, I hear you, sister. It's like, well, then you're a terrible teacher. Like, because somebody in your seat 50 years ago would have said the same thing. Would have said, these kids are useless. They don't. How about you give them something to get excited about? Start with a song. Start
Yeah.
with some rap music, right? And explain that is poetry. That is a cultural manifestation of a long line of oral, never mind written art. There are so many ways to connect all of these myriad dots to get someone, excited or meet them where they are at. Uh, Speaking for myself, I'm not afraid to pull up YouTube or movies in the classroom and say, do you dare go read the book now that you've got a taste of this? Like there are pathways. And again, for me, it just has never worked in the classroom or in life. Like this is the way to do it. And if you don't do it, you're cheating and or you're not doing it right. It's like
Right.
maybe, again, I said earlier with complete sincerity and conviction, I'm here for the teachers all day, every day, in every situation. But my one admonition to teachers that are really afraid of AI or feeling really burned out and fed up is you might want to shake it up a little bit and give the kids a little more credit than you're giving them. Like maybe the onus is on you a little bit to find ways into their heart where it's a soft sell and it doesn't have to be the you want to get a good grade in this class, do it my way. Yeah, that might work for some, but you are a dinosaur if you're teaching that way, in my opinion.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, although I feel a little bit like a dinosaur with
Hmm, hmm,
passing here. Because my students will often, and I'm fine with this, and when we talk about their writing, and we refer to other examples, they will almost always default to probably first episodic TV, streaming stuff,
yeah,
second to movies, maybe music, rarely to, oh yeah, that's just what Raymond Carver said in The Cathedral, that
right,
short story. So, oh,
right.
you no, I mean, I was reading The New Yorker, and the short story that's rarely
Yeah,
happens in class. So
yeah,
what I'm struggling with is they'll refer to a movie or an episodic TV show, and I will either have an inkling or no clue what they're talking about.
sure.
So I shoot back with, well, in that scene in Jaws, and or
Yeah,
Star Wars is mine. I think Star Wars is more ubiquitous than I think maybe it is, because even my Star Wars references go over like a lead balloon. So I refer to stuff, you know, that they don't understand. They're referring to stuff that I don't understand. It's
yeah,
not so much that we're not talking about literature. It's a little bit that,
yeah,
but it's something. Sometimes it simply is a generational divide.
yeah.
Um, that said, um, we are in. I've recently. I used to be okay with students who would bring their graphic novels or graphic novels or anime,
Hmm.
of that nature into the classroom. And
Yeah,
a couple years ago, I just said, no, we just can't do that because that's not what this class is about.
yeah,
It's an art form, and you can take the words and you can mess with syntax and you can mess with diction, you can mess with prosody and line breaks, but you still got to be playing in the same sandbox.
yeah,
And what I was experiencing too much was I've recently become sort of an advocate again for exposition, like really good. Not everything has to be show don't tell. Like a strong narrator and solid exposition can really propel a story. It just doesn't have to be
yeah.
an info dump or a chunk of text to get you to the next moment of dialogue.
Right.
Um, but what obviously anime and graphic novels do is the heavy lifting of exposition
That's right.
through the imagery. And I love graphic novels. One of my favorite books is Alison Bechdel's The Fun Home, a graphic memoir. Um, but it just doesn't work. And especially when if you're teaching literary art, you've got to sort of have some parameters, and it's got to be written, it's got to be words, it's got to
Yep.
be, a language that we generally understand. Whereas, going back to the Star Wars reference, I mean, there were certainly some weird words in Star Wars, and um, yeah. So, but that said, I think students are coming into our classes a little bit less prepared and a little less curious to mess with words because they've been indoctrinated to revere texts in certain
Yeah.
ways that they don't. understand text. They feel ashamed or they feel like they don't have, they're not smart enough. Just, bring, all I ask is, a pen or a keyboard and curiosity. That's all you need in my class.
Yeah. And listen, man, you're fighting the good fight. I do think it's probably fair and accurate to say that you and I are, despite our best intentions, dinosaurs. Heck, maybe even some of the students right now are already dinosaurs in the sense that I do think we're living through, I think we thought we had lived through it in the late 90s. And I mean, we did, but the internet, as it turns out, was more of a blip, and we really adapted as a society to
Yeah.
online world. What we're going through right now, not just with AI, right? But like text, how to communicate without words. The art form, the culture, the signifiers are all shifting. So it is challenging. I salute you and any teacher that's like the fundamental. As of today, we still use the English language, and there's 26 letter. Like there has to be a sandbox that then you can then create the avant-garde. But
Absolutely.
we may not be aware of where the art form is in 20 years. But I will say two things. One, I do think it's a certainty that this coming and future generation is going to be less inclined to read novels. It just is what it is, and more inclined to the things you're talking about. But I would also say, as a dinosaur, and I swear to God, I wasn't thinking to mention this. To me, this is proof of karma and symmetry instead of pandering. Speaking of Baltimore, I've said on many occasions, 100% seriously, the great American novel of the 21st century is The Wire, in my opinion. It as a literary work. Never mind the brilliance of the acting and the cinematography and the whole package, the music, the direction, the writing of that, five seasons is Tolstoy-esque, Melville-esque in terms of its scope, the characterization. So I don't know where I'm going with that as much as to say I am an old school. I read Moby Dick. I love novels. I still love to read, but I can appreciate that worked for me. And I think 10 years before 2000, I would have said a show on HBO on the same level as a novel. Give me a break. It's like things do change, and they don't necessarily change for the worse.
Yeah, and I think, part of we don't have a screenwriting class. We have one in the College of Art, I do believe, or in the College of Visual and Performing Arts. But screenwriting, narrative writing for games, I think, I have two friends who have made an entire career out of writing the narratives for gaming companies. And I think that's really, really cool. And I think, like with most things, there's The Wire, and then other stuff that you can really tell that the writing is not up to par. And there are storytelling and narratives in gaming which are really engaging, and then stuff that's not really up to par. I think there's still an element of art in that, and it is, I think, incumbent on us to teach those fundamentals. And then if you want to step outside the sandbox, there's really interesting stuff going on with writers and AI now and Chat GPT, and they're using it. They're sort of reflecting on it and bouncing off it and using it as a writing partner, being totally upfront about it. Um, yeah, I think the sandbox will get bigger and different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone experimenting right now with the things that we fear and loathe, there's probably a shorter pathway to a career than the most brilliant, literary fiction writer. There, and the other thing that gives me, comfort, I guess, is knowing the long line of whatever happens. There's always going to be enough weirdos in the world that still like to write, that I think novels will continue to be written, poetry will continue to be written. So that also gives me a certain peace, like a humility, that there is room for the sandbox to grow and mutate. But we've been doing this for 2,000 years. I mean, maybe we're all wrong and it's just no one writes novels, but that ain't going anywhere. It just might not quite be, like symphonies, right? Actually, that's probably a pretty good analogy. Like people are still doing them, but the golden age for symphonies has passed. And it's just a niche thing now, and we're moving and trying to teach. What I really want to call attention back to, Greg, is that I think this conversation is proven. you are doing the work of being, a mentor, a role model, a teacher, but it's a very the surface is very shaky. So this is heroic work on a lot of levels, culturally, artistically, and on a societal level.
Well, what creates art? It's typically disruption, right? Whether you're punk rock, um, you know, yeah, poetic movements and poetic schools. It's always something rising up in opposition of something else. And I think the key is um, being open to disruption. And being disrupted and being challenged is part of what keeps me interested in teaching and creating. Or I'd keep rewriting the same short story for 30 years. Like James Patterson or some of the or Tom Clancy. That's not what I'm in it for. Um, you know, uh, uh, and so when those students come into my classroom and they're disruptive because they don't speak my language and they don't know my cultural touchstones,
Right.
and they don't write about the kinds of things I write about. God bless them, and
Right.
it's all I can do to try to usher them, both in a creative path and instill enough professional development so that I think they can figure out a way to remain curious and remain creative, hopefully use those skill sets in their day in their 9 to 5, but figure out a way to balance and treasure curiosity and creativity when you are still doing what you need to do with your 9 to 5 and anxious and stressed about the world you're living in.
That's at least two mic drops in one podcast. So, mission accomplished, my man. That's good stuff. And yeah, I think that creativity, empathy, curiosity, these are the through lines. I do say I do relish, again, we're of a certain age. You do have to appreciate the punk rocker turned dinosaur in the classroom that, is looking at those whippersnappers. There's a beautiful, there's a lot of metaphors there that are all time worn and beloved. They hurt at first, but we got to jump in, right? The water is warm.
That's right.
All right, so two things. First of all, like I said, mission accomplished. Great chatting with you, but there's a lot of things we didn't get to. So open invitation for part two. Anytime we can get
Oh,
into more
cool.
crafty, more
Hey,
kind of academic-y, pedagogical. But before I let you go on this session, anything Gregg wants to say to the world circa summer 2025, whether it's an aspiring creative writing student or someone looking for that spark of empathy, curiosity, kindness.
I will say that the annual conference of the Association of Writers and Writing Programs, AWP, is coming to Baltimore in 2026. So we are going to rock the roof off of this town with what 10,000 writers coming to Baltimore in March of 2026. So that's going to be a good time for people who are interested. And if you're in the DMV, if you're interested in learning about these communities and Mason and other communities, learning about MFA programs, trying to decide about the rate on investment. I'm a marketer. I know about ROI and I know the importance of ROI. I know the importance of the narrative and the story and the persuasion that an undergrad might have to engage their parents with to say, Mason's got this creative writing BFA. You know, it also has a publishing minor, so I can do the creative work and get a minor in publishing, which might put the parents at ease with career futures. Or you're considering, maybe you've been out of school for a few years and you're considering the investment of a residential program or a low res program, both of which are great. But it is an investment. It's an investment of time, money, and creativity and energy. So come to Baltimore next March and check that out and go survey and interview all the various programs that'll be on display at the book fair. Um, you know, I'm fortunate to be in a community of wonderful faculty, students, and administrators. We are a big program, which may not also be right for everybody. Um,
Yeah.
And we're still strong in an age where a lot of other MFA programs are really weighing the pros and cons of either folding the program, or I can think of two significant literary journals that folded in the last year. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm sure there were more. Um, I think at Mason, at least, we can sort of demonstrate to you the different kinds of ROI that we might be able to provide you, in addition to being and improving your creative life and your writing ability. Um, so yeah, it's still a good time to think about MFAs.
Not, well said, enough said. Check it out, folks. I'll put a lot of links, both to
Thanks,
Greg,
Sean.
the
Thanks for all the
program.
work you do in opportunities like this, all the work at 1455 and at Shenandoah University. You're a very important part of our community as well.
Well, before I sign off, I will say, I think it's abundantly clear to anyone that has never checked us out before. The admiration is very genuine and very infectious. I just want to thank you again. I mean, look, we need heroes right now, and those of us in the arts really need heroes, and someone that has been kind of on the front lines on so many different, ways continuing to do the work. It's obvious you care, and it's obvious you make a difference. So thank you for the work you've done and continue to do. But speaking personally, you give me a lot of inspiration and courage. So I thank you very much, brother.
Thanks. And maybe the next time we talk, both the Orioles and the Red Sox will be playing better than 500 baseball.
If you're an artist, you got to have a dream, right? That's a big one.
Yeah, and if you're an artist, you're also used to sadness and
Crushing rejection and
crushing
disappointment.
rejections and late inning rallies by the opposition.
From your lips to the baseball god's ears. To be continued, my friend.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks for checking out Some Things Considered. Again, this is the podcast where we are obsessed with creativity and storytelling. Check out more. If you want to be a guest or suggest a guest, let us know. And we'll see you on the next episode. Be safe and stay cool. Thanks for tuning in to Some Things Considered. Find out more, including how to be a guest, at seanmurphy.net. Reminder, we are obsessed with story and celebrating creativity. Also, we're here to advocate for the arts by any means necessary. Drop us a line, get involved, and support our creatives who are the lifeblood of our culture. I'm Sean Murphy. See you on the next episode of Some Things Considered.